I'm going to call the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee to order. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023, and the time is 7 p.m. We are in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly, Chairwoman.
I'm here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens, Vice Chair.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govea. Alderman Thomas Lopez.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. We also have with us today Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran and Alderman at Large Patricia Klee.
Not at large.
Oh,
Not at
sorry.
large. Just large.
I promoted you. Alderman Patricia Klee, and we have the Mayor Donchis with us as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. This is our first meeting of 2023, and I got it right. Didn't say 2022. Is there anyone here who would like to make public comment on anything we'll be discussing this evening? I don't see any public. Communications.
There is none.
Interviews.
Housing Trust Fund, we have William Dolan, 71 Spitbrook Road, Unit 109, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03060, with a term to expire for January 1st, 2026 for Housing Trust Fund Committee.
Mayor Donchis, if you can come forward. As you guys are getting settled, I'll just note that our second appointment here to the Board of Assessors is unable to make it this evening and will be joining us at our February meeting. Okay.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So I am coming before you to present the nomination of Bill Dolan, William Dolan, for the Housing Trust Fund Committee. Now, you'll recall that we created the Housing Trust Fund Committee to help advise the city regarding the procedures and rules for the Housing Trust Fund, which is basically an affordable housing trust fund, to which you as the Board of Aldermen have voted to devote $10 million, the vast majority of the ARPA or federal money that we recently have received. And the legislation that created the Housing Trust Fund Committee requires that we appoint an attorney. One lawyer that we did nominate and who you approved was Andy Perlman, but he had to step aside because his partner Jerry Prunier unfortunately passed away. He's left with more than he can handle at work, and therefore he had to withdraw. So Attorney Dolan had had expressed interest in this. He was recently elected as a state rep here in Nashua, very interested in community service. He is a practicing attorney who went to Suffolk University School of Law, also has a master's in business administration from Suffolk, and of course a BA where he graduated summa cum laude, in other words, the highest honors. He, is fluent in other languages like Spanish, and obviously is very interested in affordable housing and trying to ensure that our community meets that very pressing, critical need. So I will introduce Bill Dolan and I ask him to say a few words about himself and regarding his interest in serving on the Housing Trust Fund Committee.
Thank you, Mayor Donchis. Attorney Bowen.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak. I am a resident of Nashua. I'm a practicing attorney. I believe that civic commitments and civic service are important for people that live in the community. To give back, I believe that my skills as an attorney, it gives me an opportunity that maybe others don't have, to be a service to the community and the people that live here. I think that I'm excited to get involved with the Housing Trust Committee and being able to create a plan to help Nashua move forward vis-a-vis housing.
Okay, open up to committee, just so you know, these are very directional, so you get a little bit closer, you can pull it towards you, then everybody at home can hear you a little bit better.
No problem.
Great. Alderman Lopez.
So with regards to the way that the ARPA funding is used and the Housing Trust Fund was configured. It is an effort, in addition to promoting economic development, to provide a semblance of housing equity in Nashua. Do you have any experience with people from diverse housing backgrounds and with diverse housing needs?
Yes, actually, as a young man, I grew up in public housing. I think that's another unique thing about myself, as someone who lived in housing projects. I think that's, in terms of housing, that's pretty diverse. I'm not sure if anybody else on that board has that experience, or any other applicants have had that same experience.
Thank you for your answer.
Other questions from the committee? Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward. My only question is what your experience has been. Do you have any experience in real estate law at all?
So, are you asking me, so just to be clear, in terms of real estate law or housing law, because they're actually two distinct areas?
Both.
In terms of my experience with housing and housing development, as the mayor mentioned, I have a master's in business administration from Suffolk. Part of my concentration was doing very nerdy projects on things like high-speed rail development in Brazil, particularly a project to connect Rio to Sao Paulo to Campinas when they were holding the World Cup and the Olympics within a very short period of time. So I would say, very familiar in terms of bang for your buck public development and stimulating the economy with being selective about how you develop a community.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Madam President. Just a quick question, Attorney Dolan, or Representative Dolan, I don't know which one to call you.
Thank you.
Is your practice here in Nashua, or?
I have two locations. I have one in Lowell, Massachusetts, and another in Nashua.
Okay, great. May I just quick follow-up? If I remember correctly, I think when we set up the Housing Trust Fund, we had hoped to have a local lawyer, but I don't think we made it a mandatory, so I'm glad to see that you are here. You will be familiar with the community. I think that's really is important. And that was one of the things, I remember having that discussion. I'm for some reason blanking as to what we finally came out with. I don't think we wanted to tie our hands to it, but it was important to have someone local. So thank you for stepping up. And actually, I think having you up in the State House might be a little bit of an edge too. So thank you.
Alderman Tebow. All set, Alderman Clee, sorry.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So Attorney Dolan, Representative Dolan, I just want to thank you for coming forward. It's not easy to sit on these city committees. We want to get the best, and it's good to see that, I looked at your resume and it's very strong. And so I appreciate you stepping forward because it's not an easy task, and people will hold you accountable, and as we will as well, but the city will too. So thank you so much for stepping up.
Thank you.
Alderman Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My understanding is that you practice criminal law. In your experience working with the people that you defend, I believe you also work with families as well. Have you ever had to deal with one of your clients who are at risk of losing their housing, or had limited access to housing, or if it's a probate and family matter where children were at risk, and did you help those families navigate those very delicate issues?
So I would say that based on the type of law that I practice, many of the people, especially if they're held in custody, they don't have any money to pay rent because they're living in Valley Street for a period of time. They are, of course, become housing insecure. I have helped at various times navigate the system. There are legal aid organizations in New Hampshire that I've connected them to. There was an opportunity where I actually when I had a juvenile client who was getting evicted, and did step in to help as much as I can, particularly because it seemed like the eviction was based on some of his behaviors that were a manifestation of a disability, which otherwise, if no one had advocated for that specific area of law, he may have lost his house, but he didn't.
Thank you.
Just give me 1 second, guys.
Take your time.
I have a question. I can't get us out. You're all set, Alderman Moran. I'm trying not to cough. Okay.
Cough at will, I'm patient. No,
I'm trying to
no
open this
interruption.
cough
Don't
drop.
cough at Derek.
I'm literally trying to open the cough drop and it's sorry. I'm having technical difficulties over here. Attorney Dolan, thank you for coming forward. I'm really appreciative of
I could get some water.
I have water. I'm trying to get the
Okay.
cough drop and I give up. It's fine. Thank you though. Thank you for coming forward. As Alderman Tubo was pointing out, these are, very interesting committees, but we know they take a lot of your time. So my question was around my thinking on this committee is that there's going to be a lot of contract work. So I was wondering around your experience with contracts and going through that, because that is what my thought was the lawyer part of this would be.
So along the lines of my education as part of the MBA and part of the JD, I've had various experience dealing with public-private partnerships, PPP agreements, and particularly how to structure them for the, I've always generally been on a different side of the municipality, more on the corporate side of it, but having an understanding of how to structure a PPP so that it creates value for who your client is. And I think generally, too, there is a school of thought in terms of creating joint value. I think of it more in terms of shareholder, but community value. What can both sides bring to the table to create value for both sides? And I think that's the type of thing that I would look forward to in terms of any type of contracts or PPP in this situation.
Great. I also have a follow-up. I know that I think you recently moved to Nashua. Is that true?
3 years ago.
Okay. And as overall, as someone who, you said you worked in and lived in housing projects in Nashua now, what's your kind of hope and dream for this committee to do in the next couple of years?
That is a very poignant and thoughtful question. I want to leave that committee and leave Nashua in a better way than I found it. I think that it is not a dictatorship. I don't get to make decisions on my own, but I hope to bring that voice that is unique and leave the committee and leave Nashua a better place at the end of my term.
Great. Other questions for the committee? Oh, Alderman Lopez, then Alderman Moran.
Yeah, with regards to so I noticed that you have volunteer experience in East Boston. I think Boston is an example and its surrounding communities where middle and lower income families from more diverse backgrounds don't necessarily have the same opportunities or access to housing that a lot of kids in the past have enjoyed here in New Hampshire in a more rural and now developing urban experience. So do you think your experience working with kids and seeing what families go through is likely to help you have insight into how we can develop as a city so that we maintain that status that we have of being something of a very small city but a large town, and there is still that community of welcoming, there is still that people from different places still have access to different amenities that can be shared. Do you think that your experience, in that particular area might lend some insight?
So I think maybe not relying on the experience of East Boston. I don't want to disparage our colleagues in other states and other cities, other municipalities. I think that in general, the term gentrification is a dirty word because it, by its nature, pushes out usually the lower income people, say perhaps maybe East Boston, where the kids that I worked with that were predominantly Central American kids were pushed out to, have people that came from other areas of Boston who wanted, to Maverick Square, for instance, if anyone doesn't know, is a 5-minute train ride from downtown Boston. So, there seemed to be, in terms of developing specifically East Boston, there was a sort of push. The lower income, more brown kids were pushed out of that neighborhood. And I don't want to see that repeated in Nashua.
I appreciate the answer, especially because the downtown adjacent neighborhoods have a very strong presentation of Central American culture and have always been a place where immigrants and people from other places have come to kind of start their livelihood, their families, get involved in Nashua, kind of see what things are about. And I think it's important that we remember that that is an essential part of what makes downtown as vibrant as it is today, and as vibrant as it has always been, is the people more than just the props and the fixtures and that type of thing. Thank you.
All set, Alderman Lopez? Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Maybe more of a statement than a question, or how you would handle it. So the affordable housing is described as 80% of the median income for a family of four. I know I'm a supporter of low to moderate income. Low, you're gonna have to go to Section 8, essentially, private owners. What would you do to help forge a way for that 60% median income of family four to establish or not be pushed out by gentrification here in Nashua?
So, just to clarify your question, so I think what you're, essentially, seemingly what you're asking me is sort of this push and pull between economic development, gentrification, maintaining the flair of the neighborhood that is currently there. I think that there is certainly, like I said, a push and pull between economic development, best bang for your buck, affordable housing. These situations are complex, and that's why I think we have a committee to handle these things.
That was a very political answer. Thank you.
To a very political question. Thank you.
Game recognizes game.
Are you all set, Alderman Moran?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Alderman Clement?
Not a question, but, you know, I'm very impressed with the conversation here this evening, and I think you'll serve the committee very well, and I am enthusiastically supporting you, so.
Thank you very much.
All set? All right, thank you. We will take up your nomination later in the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have the Ethics Review Committee. Timothy Bush, new appointment, 378 Main Street, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03060. Term to expire January 1st, 2026.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Ethics Review Committee is a committee that's created by Nashua ordinances, specifically to review complaints directed to the National Code of Ethics. There is a code of ethics within the ordinances. And if there is a complaint made that alleges a violation of one or more specific provisions of the National Code of Ethics, as I'm calling it, then the Ethics Review Committee reviews the complaint and takes whatever action might be appropriate. This doesn't allege a violation of the code. It alleges a violation, so we're going to hold a hearing or take some evidence. The committee has lapsed for a number of years because there haven't been any ethics complaints. And typically what the city has done is reconstitute the committee if complaints come in or if expected complaints are on the horizon. So, and I believe at least one or more aldermen have raised the issue of should we reconstitute the committee, which I agree is a good idea. So Tim Bush is my first appointment to this committee. Now, Tim is very well qualified to be on the Ethics Review Committee. Of course, he is a practicing attorney in Nashua, having grown up in the city. He went to BC as an undergraduate and to Suffolk Law School. He previously served on the Ethics Review Committee. If the Ethics Review Committee were like other committees where the provisions of law generally say that a person serves in a holdover status until a replacement is appointed and confirmed. If that were the case here, Attorney Bush would still be on the committee. But because there haven't been any hearings for some years, no complaints, this legislation says the terms lapse and you have to reappoint people. So Tim has previously been on the committee. He's previously served as chair of the committee. In addition, Attorney Bush has served for about 2 years on the Advisory Committee on Judicial Ethics at the state level. That is a committee that is appointed by the New Hampshire Supreme Court to advise judges regarding questions of ethics. And any other matters that come before the committee. So he's very experienced, both here at the city level and at the state level in considering codes of ethics and related issues. So I'm very pleased to be able to appoint Tim Bush as the first of a number of members on the Ethics Review Committee. And I'll ask Tim to tell you a little bit about himself to the extent you're not familiar already, and of his interest in rejoining the committee.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson, Mayor Donches. Thanks, everyone. Just a couple of things. I appreciate the mayor talking about my kind of postgraduate education, but frankly, I think my most valuable education came here in the city of Nashua. I was the first class to go through Birch Hill Elementary School, which dates me pretty significantly. I won't give you the exact year, but I got out of Nashua High School in 1984. So I've been here all my whole life. I did, not to be controversial, but I did leave North Nashua. I grew up by the airport to move to South Nashua, and I've taken some heat from that from some of my longtime friends, but don't get over it. As Mayor Don just said, I did serve on this committee a number of years ago. I was actually surprised at how many years ago it was. It seems like it had flown by. And I will just tell, the alderman, based on my experience, what you already know, it's a very limited committee in terms of its jurisdiction. I think if you look at it, we did have a hearing. I don't know at, what liberty. I'm obviously can't get into the complainants as to who was there, and what the issue was about. But, it was very interesting. I remember Mike Tabasco was on the committee, and Jack Kelly, and we were advised by City Council, and Mrs. Weeks was on the committee. And I found it to be a fairly positive experience. Those of us who've been around a long time know that in the late 80s, early 90s, there were some problems with the Board of Aldermen. And there are sometimes issues that come up with city employees. Usually it would be covered by either a criminal statute or a civil statute or something other than the particular auspice of this committee. But, we at least from my prior dealing on the committee, I was very pleased with the people I was serving with. I thought they had everyone's best interests at heart. And I thought, we conducted a fair hearing and rendered a fair decision.
Great. Questions from the committee? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So again, Mr. Bush, Attorney Bush, thank you for coming and stepping up. It's, again, certainly this is one of those committees that's probably somewhat controversial a little bit. Like you said, it's completely, or like Mayor Don just said, it's very different than other committees. You don't meet regularly unless something's going on, right? And I'm glad to hear that you've done it before. You said that you only heard one case last time you were on the Ethics Committee?
That's correct. There was another case that, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Follow up.
Sorry. Yep.
So I'm going to throw a hypothetical, and it's not something I think, but I want to make sure that it's clear out there how you think about this. So my first part of this two-part question is, would you say that you're close to any of the aldermen that are on the aldermanic board today?
I'm sure I like all the aldermen, but no, I don't think I know any
Okay.
in particular. I know Ernie Jenny.
Okay.
I know Ernie.
So if, someone you're close to comes before the ethics board as someone that's got the complaint against them, how would you be able to handle that if it came in front of you?
Well, I think there's actually some guidelines, if you look at the ethics rules, maybe under the hearing, if you look at the composition of the board rules of procedure, 12-31, I think it's B7.
That is what it is, B7.
Yeah, I think if there's any issue with respect to, I always err on the side of caution when it comes to ethics. That may be why why the Supreme Court had put me on the advisory board. There's 3 judges and 2 lawyers in that committee. That's it, 2 private lawyers. And, if there was somebody on there, if there was a complaint against Ernie Jetty, for example, not that there ever would be, because we all know Ernie, but I wouldn't sit on it.
Okay.
And I haven't talked to Ernie probably in 2 or 3 years, because I haven't seen him at a national bar meeting or anything, but just the mere fact that I know him a little bit, I probably wouldn't serve in that.
Okay, we'll keep them out of trouble. Thank
There you go.
Thank you.
And just as a follow-up to that, the exact wording says, no member of the committee whose participation would be a conflict of interest shall participate in the hearing, except when called as a witness. So, we could put that on the record, but it's very clear as to how that should work. Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, so first of all, I could not see Alderman Jettie getting into an ethics dispute.
I agree with that.
I'm keeping my eyes on Shifty Clemens over here. When I was looking at your resume, I had it in mind because I had noticed that you'd been on the committee before, I had it in mind to ask you what we should ask you about the committee, since you've had practical experience with it and more experience than the members that will be interviewing for it. Instead, I would just commend you on your history of professional accomplishment. Thank you for being willing to serve and recognize that you are very familiar with being in a position of public trust, and it seems like you're very effective in that role. And I think our ethics committee will much be benefited from your presence on it. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Clemens.
Thank you. I remember when you were on the ethics committee from back then, and you did an admirable job. Thank you for all your service. Thank you for stepping forward, and I will definitely support you.
Thank you, Alderman Clemens. I appreciate that.
Alderman Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Would you say there's a conflict? Let's say you're an attorney, obviously.
Yes.
And there's a complaint against Attorney Bolton, and just because you guys are attorneys, would you stick together with a fellow attorney?
I would say this. I would think we would, if there was a complaint against, let's say, Attorney Bolton, we would probably have a larger issue, to be candid with you. And the issue would be if you look at the Ethics Review Committee and all of their rules, and if you look at Chapter 5, replete throughout these rules are indications that the city council would have to, it advises the board as to what to do. I think if there was a complaint against Attorney Bolton, one of the first things the committee would have to do would be to make a decision whether or not we would have to have separate counsel, City of Concord, City of Manchester, somebody from one of those places to sit on that hearing. Because, you know, I'm more familiar with Celia Leonard, who was worked as liaison with the committee before. But I would also, you know, probably have them take it up. They're both lawyers, and they certainly wouldn't want to, I wouldn't want to be part of any type of conflict of interest if there was a complaint against them.
Yes, and I've thought about that question. I think we would need outside counsel to advise the committee in that hypothetical circumstance.
And I think that's a very reasonable stance to take to avoid any type of, well, just bad perception, I guess. I'd be harsh in my words.
I think that's right, Alderman Moran. I mean, I clerked, one of my most difficult years was as a law clerk. I served with under a U.S. magistrate judge named William Berry. And he was William Berry Jr., actually, who was the father of William Berry III, who some of you may know, Nashua guy. And he always gave everyone a fair hearing, no matter what. And even if they didn't, we dealt with a lot of pro se litigants from the prison. And even if they didn't technically do everything they had to do or didn't technically meet their requirements in some type of oral argument setting, he would always err on the side of giving them a fair hearing. And here, you know, when you have a complainant, you know, this is a community that represents the city of Nashua. You want to make sure that any litigant before it, a potential litigant, you know, they may not like the ultimate decision, but you want them to at least come away and say, hey, look, I had a fair hearing. And one of the ways to do that is when there's ever even a potential conflict of interest, you know, even if it doesn't technically violate an ethical rule, you don't really skate that line. You just say, look, let's just do this in a way that's fair for everyone, and we you know, you don't want to draw yourself an ethical complaint if you're a lawyer for being involved in something that's close to call.
All set?
May I follow up?
Alderman Moran.
Thank you. That's a great answer, and that's been my experience with attorneys, is always erring on the side of caution. And I will say, I hope you are prepared that this is going to be a lot busier than probably your last stint. I foresee many, mostly frivolous. It's just the way it's going to be. And I thank you so much for knowing that coming in and being prepared to sit on the committee. And of course, I'm sure you aren't saying that in your head they're frivolous, but that there's going to be a lot. Second, are you a BC Eagles fan?
I am. I
I'm
used to be before the ACC. Yeah.
Terriers. I went to BU. Sorry to hear that.
Well, you'll be happy to know that my oldest daughter went to BU in spite of growing up in a BC household, so.
Great.
I was dancing. I went to BU. Everyone else.
Well, we should have a hockey game.
On 2 sheets of
We
ice
have
that
to
might
do
be
those.
downtown.
Are there other questions from the committee? Great. I don't have any questions. You answered all of the ones that I had listed, so I appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee, and I look forward to learning more about you, and obviously I'm sure you will do great work like you've done in the past, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be back next time with Mr. Minkara, who hopefully can come in February.
Before you go, are you going to also be coming back with a few more ethics review? How many people
Yes.
have to be on that committee?
It is a 5-member committee, so yes, we've got other people in the works.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Mayor. Happy New Year. Okay. Application to license hawkers, peddlers, itinerant vendors license.
There is none.
Appointments by the mayor.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the following new appointment to the Housing Trust Fund Committee, William Dolan, with a term to expire January 1st, 2026. I'd also like to make a motion to recommend the following new appointment to the Ethics Review Committee, Timothy E. Bush, with a term to expire January 1st, 2026.
You heard the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those two nominations go forward. Unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
None.
New business ordinances.
We have O-22-039, amending the tax exemption for elderly persons by increasing the maximum allowed individual and combined net income and asset amounts. I'd like to make a motion for final passage.
To recommend final passage?
Yep.
Motion is to recommend final passage. Discussion. Alderman Clee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. This is something that I brought forward to the board. As you can see, we have a number of my constituents here who have, my colleagues here who have also brought this forward too. This was just what I would call the finishing touches of the original change that we made to the elderly tax credit. We did half the job when we brought the credit dollars up. We did not bring up the income or the, pardon me, I apologize
Assets,
for.
I think?
Yeah, the assets, thank you. The values of the assets. When I was going through this, I originally brought it up was because I had a constituent who asked me a question and said, I got one of the largest Social Security raises ever, and I think this is gonna slowly push me over the edge in income level. And they were correct, it's 8% or thereabouts. So I went to Mr. Griffin and I asked him and I said, do you think raising the income level 8% would be good? Because we were looking at, cost of living and inflation, but inflation changes so much. We wanted something that was really consistent. And the federal government came up with the 8% for the Social Security, and more or less actually for federal employees as well, depending upon what kind of group you fell into. So we agreed that this 8% was the right one. So looking at the assets, again, do you go with the inflation? Do you go with cost of living? How do you handle that? And we really felt that doing an 8% increase, it's not a major jump. I heard some people who said, we should bring it up much higher and so on. And But I think that we need to do baby steps. I think the 8% is a good start. Maybe in a year we'd have to change it, I don't know. But I think this is a good start. One of the questions I think that was asked when Alderman Moran had brought the same 8% up for the disabled and so on was, why do we keep married and single together? And we put it all in one grouping. And the reason why we do that is because if something were to happen to one of them, that would drastically change. And we didn't want that to happen, so we keep it as a one person or two. So that if someone were to, because if someone were to pass, suddenly that person goes into a one income, into a single and not as a married couple. And therefore they could lose their elderly if we were to have like a 35,000 and a 50,000, which some communities do this. I think the previous board, and Alderman Clemens may remember this, I don't know. I tried finding it, I could not find it. But a previous board had decided it was better to do it as a two rather than a one and a two, because if you do that, if something happens to the other person, you have to reduce their income eligibility. So I think 8% was a good number to put our hat on, and it helps finish the job that we started with raising the elderly tax credit.
All set, Alderman Clegg?
I'm sorry,
Alderman Clemens?
exemption, I should say, not credit, sorry.
Alderman Clemens?
Thank you.
Alderman Tebow?
Yes, I co-endorse this as well because and in particular the 8%, because my concern were folks who are on a fixed income, particularly where their only source of income is Social Security. So if that's your only source of income and all of a sudden it jumped 8%, but we didn't change this amount, then you could find yourself not getting this and all of a sudden owing some money. And I think, so to me, that was a good number to use based on what I feel is probably our most vulnerable population of seniors. And then, of course, 8% if you have, another source of income or whatever is also, I think, a pretty good barrier, or not barrier, a good barometer to use for that. In regards to when they came up with that, I don't know. It was probably before my time. But I think it's a good policy to keep the married and the single the same. So I certainly support that.
Great.
Thank you.
Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Really the only shame in this is not being able to have had some foresight and predict the future to be able to catch everybody at the end of the year instead of, this for next year, because it was hard to see. We had an elderly man come in here and show us that he had zero last year and now all of a sudden he has a $1,200, tax bill. And I think, you can't always foresee that stuff coming, but it was unfortunate to see him, and and there's probably, I'm sure, many other people that got kind of cut off by this. And so, to Alderman Clee's point, we are now finishing the job so that we don't leave people behind. And I think it's important that we at least get those people that were there last year, and then hopefully, maybe in the future we look at it a different way, or we're able to bump it up more or whatnot in the future. But like you said, baby steps for that. I co-endorse it as well, and I full-heartedly, support this.
Great. Any other? Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, I think it's just important to keep in mind that economic gentrification can come in a lot of different ways, and where we have a steadily growing tax structure due to a lot of passed down expenses that might be coming from the state that we don't necessarily have control over, it can be tempting to look at how we can cut amenities that a lot of special populations are very much in need of, such as transportation, such as size of schools, even law enforcement in inner city neighborhoods where there's a lot more people to interact with each other. So you need a solid police force. If you look at just the price tag that comes per taxpayer, then it can be a burden on people who generate less revenue and own property in the city, and that can discourage them from being able to stay in the city. But likewise, reducing the services that have made Nashua consistently top 5, 3, whatever, on different scoring charts, and are part of the culture that people have grown up with and enjoyed here, is also a way of pushing out people with particular need for access to those services. We can't just cut the budget, because even though elderly people who grew up here are struggling to maintain their affordability, they probably need to use the bus system, they probably need paratransit, and these are things that cost money, and particularly, we're learning, in the case of paratransit and public transportation, are underfunded to the point where they can't find people to do it. So it is important that we find a middle ground between removing amenities that are necessary as a function of a city with a population with diverse needs and maintaining affordability. And I think these exemptions are an essential part of it, recognizing that some populations contribute in other ways, whether they're veterans, whether they're disabled, or whether they're elderly. Nashua is better for having these people as its residents and as its neighbors. So I look forward to voting for this, in favor of this tonight, and again, in the Board of Aldermen.
Alderman Clegg.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I wanted to just, in some regards, I apologize because it may seem like minutia, but I wanted to clarify that the assets do not include the residence that the person lives in, and they can only get an exemption for the resident that they live in here in Nashua. However, if a person has temporarily been removed from that residence, for instance, they had to go to rehabilitation or a nursing home for a temporary period of time, they don't lose it. I want to make sure that that's very clear, that if a person has to be rehabilitated, or even if it lasts a year or even more, they're not going to lose it. I don't want people to think, oh, we give it to them, then we take it away when they turn their back to it. As well as if the person has what we call an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, used to be called like a mother-in-law apartment. As long as they live in one part of that residence, even if it's the tiniest part of it, doesn't have to be the larger home, they still get the full exemption for the property. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I have had people who've called me and said, oh, I don't qualify because my house is worth more than the $162,000. It's like, your house doesn't qualify for that. You know, it's exempted from your assets. That would be kind of, so, I mean, just to push the envelope, you could own $1 million home, not have a mortgage, and it's not part of your asset. But that's because no one's gonna force you to sell it to pay the taxes for it. That would be absolutely ridiculous, and we would never do that, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, all set? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries. Everything is staying on the table. I have no public. General discussion? Any remarks by the alderman? Alderman Clegg.
I just wanted to make an announcement that the Finance Committee meeting tomorrow will start at 7:30, not at 7 o'clock. Just for the general public and for those members that are on it. It's going to be at 7:30.
Great. Any other remarks? Okay. Do I have a motion? It's supposed to be the vice chair. Alderman Lopez.
Move to
But he
adjourn.
never puts his hand up.
I like variety.
Go ahead, Alderman Lopez.
Move to adjourn, I did.
Oh, I heard it. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Am I supposed to allow us to discuss that? We are adjourned at 7:43.